Good morning, good morning. I hope everyone is doing well this morning. Thank you for joining us on the Dillon Church of God podcast. I know this is a little different than you have been used to hearing on our podcast if you've been tuning in. We started doing podcasts back in 2022, but we only use it as an additional platform to upload our Sunday morning and our Wednesday evening sermons in an audio-only format. However, in seeing how we were already streaming our services live to Facebook and have it archived on YouTube and Vimeo with both video and audio, it was a bit over redundant to upload them as podcasts as well. So we are starting this new format now with unique content to further engage our audience and continue to share from the biblical word and the good news of Jesus Christ. And we hope you will enjoy this new content and actively engage with us as well as we put it out. You'll be able to listen to these podcasts on Amazon Music, Apple Music, Spotify, any other typical audio streaming apps, and I will also be uploading it to YouTube if you don't have access to any of those apps. So make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite streaming app and on YouTube, and like and share the content. YouTube will even have a comment section as well if you want to leave a comment, suggestion, or question, be it, of course, in a respectable and relatable manner. We will try to put out content regularly, possibly weekly, so be sure to subscribe so you can be alerted when that new content is posted. And I realize now I've been doing all this talking and have not properly introduced myself yet. My name is Philip Rouse. I'm the media pastor here at the Dillon Church of God. I've started here part-time about 2 years ago, and after getting licensed in the Church of God, I started working full-time last March. Basically, anything media or technology related, I handle along with various pastoral duties within the church. I guess you could consider a church podcast as a nice niche between media and pastoral work, and it will certainly be interesting to see how this pans out, but I do plan on having additional speakers from our staff and from our members, and even some guest speakers. So my voice will not be the only one that you ever hear on here, which is a good thing for me and our listeners as well. But moving past introductions, I would like to get into our topic of focus today, which is the topic of fasting. Now, for the last few years here at the church, we have incorporated a 21-day fast into the beginning of each calendar year, and we present it as a corporate fast for our members to participate with us together as a church body. And while I fully support fasting, both as a group and individually, and I think it's a great way to start off one's year as a time to refresh and to reorient ourselves towards God, I do see the potential for confusion and uncertainty around understanding the purpose of a corporate fast and maybe even fasting in general. There's the general what and when and how of fasting, which we will address today, but there are a lot of specific questions I hear asked about and around this practice as well. Now, some of those questions are like, is fasting necessary or even required? Does it matter what I fast? Does it matter how long I fast for? Is it even safe for me to participate in? And a lot of people will mention, isn't fasting supposed to be a private matter? Why are we even talking about it at all? And along those same lines, there are a lot of people that ask if corporate fasting itself is even biblical. This is the content I plan to walk us through here in this podcast today, and hopefully at the end of it, your conscience will be eased a little bit, your understanding will be better, and you'll be encouraged to incorporate fasting as a regular practice into your own life and personal walk with Christ. So let's go ahead and dive into this topic by starting with the most obvious question: what is fasting? Fasting is a practice of not eating or drinking for a certain period, and it has been a practice within human culture for thousands of years. The primary reason for fasting is for religious purposes, but it has also been done for reasons of health and in some cases for survival. The practice has gained and lost popularity over various periods and cultures, but it has recently gained popularity within the area of modern fitness and health sciences. You probably heard the term intermittent fasting somewhere in your day-to-day conversations. Even though intermittent fasting is not necessarily a new practice of any sort, it does seem to have made an interesting revival as it has been applied within modern dieting and health regimens to help increase or retrain one's metabolism. And from what brief research I've done on the subject, The overall census appears to be positive towards its benefit on one's overall health. But health and fitness are not the area I want to focus this podcast towards. What we'll be looking at today is fasting within the biblical narrative. Now, there are various mentions of fasting within the biblical text, and to get a full understanding of the practice as it relates to the biblical narrative as a whole, you really have to visit several, if not all, the examples. If you had to take a guess, and props to you if you already know, because I didn't, but if you had to take a guess at which biblical character fasted first in the Bible, what would be your guess? And I'll give you a few seconds to think about it here. If you guessed Moses, you are correct. Now, I personally just assumed it was Abraham. I mean, he is the father of the faith, but no, it is Moses. Moses fasted on two separate occasions, both interactions with God on Mount Sinai. And these are mentioned in Exodus 34 and Deuteronomy 9. The first occasion is when Moses ascends to receive the Ten Commandments from God, and the second occurs when he returns to receive the stone tablets a second time after the first are broken due to the rebellion and sin of the Israelites. Both last for 40 days and for 40 nights, which, by the way, is truly miraculous and not a length of time I'd recommend anyone attempt a complete fast. I've read various numbers for how long a healthy individual can go without food, anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, even up to a month I've read. But without water, it's something like 3 to 4 days max. This cannot be accomplished without God divinely sustaining him. Another biblical pop quiz. There are two other individuals who go through a 40-day fast in the Bible. Can you guess who they are? And again, I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. If you said Elijah and Jesus, you are again correct. Jesus is probably a more familiar figure for this type of fast, but Elijah maybe not as much. Elijah fasts for 40 days and 40 nights after his face-off with the prophets of Baal in 1 Kings 19. After the prophets of Baal failed to coerce their God into responding to them, God responds to Elijah with fire upon the altar, burning up the altar and everything with it. Afterwards, Elijah puts to death the prophets, and as a response, he receives a death threat from Jezebel and retreats into the wilderness and goes into a deep fit of depression, telling God just to end his life there. Instead, as we all know, God sends an angel with food and drink for him, and after regaining his strength, he journeys to Mount Horeb for 40 days and nights without need of further sustenance. Jesus, of course, fasts after being baptized in the Jordan, during which the Spirit of God descends upon him like a dove, resting on Jesus, and there's a profession of who he truly is as the Son of God. From there, Jesus goes into the wilderness to be tempted, and during that time is where this particular fast occurs. You may notice a theme within these unique and miraculous periods of fasting. They all seem to occur after a powerful and tangible interaction with God. For these men, it was only right to respond in such an extreme and radical way to such an extreme and radical interaction. Another time when fasting occurs is as a response to God's judgment, intervention, or provision. The most well-known example of this occurs in Jonah, where the Ninevites fast and repent as a response to Jonah's short prophecy that God may have mercy on them. In 1 Samuel 7, we see God's people in distress as they feel abandoned by God due to their own actions. And God tells Samuel to tell his people to repent, and the people obey and respond with fasting. In Ezra chapter 8, during the return from exile, the people fast for direction and for provision. And we see in Acts 13, the people of the church of Antioch fast before choosing to send out Paul and Barnabas to go and evangelize. You may also remember David fasting for the life of his child in 2 Samuel 12 after the sins he commits against Bathsheba and Uriah. In many of these cases, there is a response of humility and of repentance. In others, direction, wisdom, and protection are desired. In most of these cases and situations, the desired response is given by God, but not all of them. In either case, in such moments of crisis or decisiveness where God's divine influence and provision is surely required and seen, the appropriate response for such situations is, you guessed it, fasting. The third circumstance you commonly see fasting occur is as a response in the Bible is one that you may not be as familiar with, and this is during times of mourning or grief. When news of the death of Saul and Jonathan came to David in 2 Samuel 1, David and all encamped with him mourned and fasted for them both till the evening. In the book of Nehemiah, there are various mentions of fasting and mourning due to the destruction of the temple and the exile. The 21-day fast of Daniel, which is the basis of our 21-day fast, is in response to visions given to him concerning great times of distress and terror. In Daniel chapter 10, it says that he mourned for 3 weeks, or 21 days, and he ate no choice food, meat, and drank no wine. Also, it says he used no lotions, which is a curious product to refrain from using. I also don't know exactly what choice foods refers to within this context, but from what brief research I've done, most commentaries suggest he avoided bread and sweets in addition to the absence of meat and wine. For us today, this would probably be something like eating only basic fruits or nuts and drinking water for 21 days. This is a unique example of selective fasting in the Bible. Most of the fasts are of food and water or just food in general. Either way, this fasting is a response to great moments of loss, of grief, and of mourning as they occur within the lives of these individuals and groups. After going through these various examples myself, I concluded that my view and understanding of fasting personally has been rather shallow. For me, and maybe for many others, fasting was not something I regularly did in my life. I participated in the 21-day fast every year with the church to refresh myself and to spiritually reorient myself towards God and towards spiritual disciplines. And I'm not knocking this way of thinking about fasting. All I'm saying is most of the time it was still oriented towards myself. I did this fast each year with the church out of a sense of requirement or responsibility on myself rather than as an appropriate response to God as those in the Bible seem to understand it. Whenever I would choose to fast or whatever I would choose to fast, it was often not really much of a sacrifice on me personally, and I would force myself through it grudgingly and with complaining. And if I'm being honest, I typically wouldn't find myself getting a lot out of it afterwards. Maybe I'd read my Bible or pray a little bit more often for a certain period of time, but that was it. Recently, however, actually just last year around October, I came to a moment where I desired guidance and direction in my life and in my ministry. As I said earlier in the intro, there have been a lot of changes in my life this past year, and starting a new job, going into ministry, getting married, and I had not taken the time to account for all that God had done in my life. When I did, I realized that I didn't have an assurance in direction, especially in my ministry, but I did desire it. So I chose to respond with a fast, but this time I was not focusing the fast towards the result. I really didn't even consider what I wanted as a result. I just focused on God, who is the one who directs our steps anyways. It was a short fast, only 7 days, but I made sure it was truly a sacrifice, and this is key. When I came into those moments when I truly felt that typical feeling of hunger and of craving as we do during fasting, I didn't groan and complain, but I leaned into that state of burden, that state of being uncomfortable, and humbled myself and prayed. And even after a few days, I found myself actually grieving during some of these moments. After I completed the fast, believe it or not, God responded to me almost immediately, but it was not what I expected. You'd think if you were fasting and praying for direction, then God would simply give you a direction, but it was actually more of an opportunity. Really, a series of opportunities that presented themselves that, when I chose to take them, oriented the direction of my ministry towards a particular focus. And I had confirmation that this was the right direction of focus because it was oriented in the likeness of God's character. This may seem a little cryptic, but I don't care to get too much into my personal testimony within fasting. What I realized, though, was missing from my previous attempts at fasting was the spirituality and the sacredness at the core of the practice. This is where I'm going to bring in some scripture that I feel really hammers the idea home and brings all of this together, and it's in the book of Isaiah. Now, I've read through Isaiah several times, but this was the first time this verse really stuck out to me, and Jessica Gleason, who is one of our members here at the Dillon Church of God and who, along with her husband, often teach on Wednesday nights, brought this verse up in her recent sermon. And as I was listening, I realized it was just some additional confirmation. It is in chapter 58 of Isaiah, and I'm going to read through this because it's very important, and it's verses 1 through 10. It says, "Cry aloud, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their transgression, to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the judgment of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments, and they delight to draw near to God. Why have we fasted, and you see it not? Why have we humbled ourselves, and you take no knowledge of it? Behold, in the day of your fast, you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight, to hit with a wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice be heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day for a person to humble himself? Is it to bow down his head like a reed, and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Will you call this a fast and a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. And you shall cry, and he will say, Here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and spreading wickedness, if you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom will be as the noonday." We see here God declares through Isaiah that his people are failing to understand the true nature of fasting. He says that they claim to seek him out and that they are eager to know his ways. And they seek his guidance and his justice in their own lives. And they fast for his response, but they do not get the response they desire and complain. So God takes them to task. He exposes the nature of their fast. Their acts of humility and shame are only for themselves, and after their fast, they continue in their wicked acts. They continue to cause strife and division. They continue treating people unjustly and taking advantage of the poor. Yet, they desire God to respond to them with blessing and favor. I do recommend you read all the way through the whole chapter, but as I read through this chapter, it really challenged me in my understanding of fasting. Fasting is not done to simply coerce a particular response from God. It is done as a response to God, to his mercy, his goodness, his love, his justice, his righteousness, his glory, his power, his grace. He is sovereign, holy, and there is none like him. He is the only one who is right to judge, and he is the only one who directs our path. He gives and he takes away, and he raises up and he tears down, and he is the creator, and he is the life. He is the only one who truly sustains us. And when we feel that hunger in our flesh, that desire and that craving for something missing during periods of fasting, we are to be reminded of that very truth. Our hunger for food and thirst for drink should remind us of God's hunger for righteousness and thirst for justice. Our state of humility during times of fasting should remind us of His lowering Himself to draw near to us and to rescue us. Our patience in enduring through sacrifice and with prayer should remind us of His patience and long suffering for us and His consistent love and desire to reunite with us. Our grievances during fasting should remind us of His grief towards sin in the world. In this, we are blessed. In this, we receive our reward to be reminded and to form in us a desire to imitate the likeness of God, the likeness of Christ. And we are to respond again towards others in this same likeness by providing food and drink to those who truly hunger and thirst, not because of fasting, but because of poverty and oppression and injustice. We should seek to restore righteousness and justice to others. We should draw near to each other in order to serve and to be hospitable. We should root out sin within our own lives and the lives of others through sharing and encouraging one another in the truth. This is the true sacredness within the practice of biblical fasting. We respond to God with humility and sacrifice and are reminded of who He is and His relation towards us. And our reward is to participate and bear the image of His likeness towards others. In this way, we can see strongholds removed through fasting. We can see chains broken. We can see relationships restored. We can see healing physically, mentally, and spiritually. We can see needs met, and God will draw near to us and will prosper and bless us. But this requires us to recover the true essence of fasting. That is the practice we share in part in the suffering of Christ, as is stated in 1 Peter 4 and Romans 8. So, to quickly summarize and revisit the questions at the beginning, first, is fasting required? I wouldn't personally use the term required, but I also wouldn't argue against anyone who did. I believe it is an appropriate response to God's intervention and presence in our lives, as we see in the Bible. This is certainly true in the biblical narrative, but also as we see and is implemented of the practice of fasting in the lives of the followers of Christ, again, for millennia, for thousands of years. What should I fast? That's another question. Fasting involves, as I said before, a giving up of food and a drink in some manner. Other than the mention of lotion in Daniel, there is no other substance or activity that is supported as a practice of fasting. I believe this is because of the role of food and drink in our life. It is literally required to sustain us. Being glued to your iPhone for 8 hours a day or smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, those are not particularly healthy habits, but they are also not in any way required for survival. These are or can be byproducts of our time, our culture, of our upbringing, different things like that. And I do believe incorporating discipline in your physical and spiritual life by striving to remove such habits is a healthy and necessary practice, especially for a follower of Christ, but it is not the same as the practice of fasting. Within fasting, food and drink, you can fast both food and drink together, or just food or just drink. You can fast a particular meal or a set of meals, or even restrict your diet, like in the example of Daniel. But again, it does need to be a fasting of food and or drink. Now, there's the question of how long should I fast? And from what I can tell, timing does not seem to be the main focus or factor within the essence of fasting. I would again not recommend a 40-day fast of any kind, but you see various links within these scriptures of the fast, from a single day to 3 days or 7 days. In Daniel's case, it was 3 weeks. And there are many that I read that do not specify an exact time, but whatever time frame you choose, make sure that you can commit to it, and make sure in that time that you keep your focus, again, on God. And then there's the question that some people have, if it's safe for me to fast at all. A lot of people have unique health issues that may make fasting more of a burden than those of us who are healthy. But in using good wisdom and judgment, which I do recommend, I still believe everyone is capable of fasting. Even if it's just as simple as fasting particular food or drink that is commonplace or that you deem necessary in your diet regimen, that's fine too. Again, there should be some sacrifice, and there's going to be some kind of craving that comes about for that missing element. But this is not just to unnecessarily burden you or to be an annoyance. It is, again, as I said, and as the scriptures say, to be a part of sharing in the suffering of Christ, who also went without food and water within his ministry. But he also, as the Son of God and as one with God, suffered that hunger and thirst for righteousness and justice within the world. And so when we do this as a follower of Christ, this is a part of sharing in that suffering of Christ. You may also ask, what should I incorporate, if anything, along with fasting? And of course, I recommend and we recommend prayer. And this is why we call it 21 days of fasting and prayer, and not just 21 days of fasting. Prayer and communion with God throughout this time of fasting is very important, and it's also part of that realizing the need to stay in communion with God always, to stay in prayer with him always, not just for his response to you, but in response to him and who he is and our relationship we have with him. Also, humility is an important element and should be part, especially of the initial response. Possibly also some form of discipline should be implemented if you're struggling with something that is impacting your physical or spiritual life, as we talked about before, and especially if it is a sinful behavior. Now, again, these two final questions, they kind of go together. The first one is corporate fasting biblical? And the answer is yes, as was mentioned in the examples, some of them at least. We have examples of individuals, but many others were practiced by groups and communities and churches and even whole nations. In Jonah, they even require the cattle to fast. So if your household is fasting and you deem it appropriate to include your pets, there is some scripture to back up your case. But corporate fasting is part of the biblical narrative. And there's this other question: should fasting be a private matter, or shouldn't fasting be a private matter? And with this, I also say yes, but maybe not to the extent some conclude from Jesus' statements within the Sermon on the Mount. You don't need to disclose what you are fasting or for how long, or that you are fasting at all, and you should not make it a habit to give hints that you are. Again, the fasting is not about you, it's about him, your response to him, and any attention you draw to yourself will distort that purpose. But I've had people ask, well, what if someone tries to tempt me to eat and doesn't know that I'm on a fast? Should I just lie to them? And I tell them, no, you can be honest, but again, direct your honesty towards God and not towards yourself. It's not so much about trying to keep it secret or covert, or it's more about where the focus of the fast lies, and that focus should always be upon God, and it should be something intimate and personal. So hopefully by now some of your questions around fasting have been answered. Hopefully your understanding of the practice is improved, and most importantly, I hope you've been encouraged to implement fasting into your walk with Christ, and not just as a once a year thing required by our church or by any church, but as a consistent part of your walk with Christ. And as you reach such moments of revelation or decisiveness or of grief or loss, it's in such moments and through such a response that we are reminded that God is the one who sustains us through such times, and not just looking back, but also projected forward in trusting that he will continue to sustain us in all things. For we live not by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from God. And with that, I'm going to close. I know this was a bit of a lengthy first podcast. I don't plan for all of them to be this long, but I do hope you've enjoyed the content and format, and I will continue to put out future podcasts, and I hope you'll stay actively engaged in those as well. As I said at the beginning, you can find us on most audio streaming apps, on YouTube, and you can check us out on Facebook and on Instagram just by searching Dillon Church of God, or by following the links I will leave in the descriptions, both in the YouTube and in the podcast. And don't forget to like and comment and subscribe. And if you get the chance, make sure to share it with friends, family, whoever. Try to get it out there. But again, we hope you enjoyed this podcast today, and we hope you'll continue to tune in for more biblical content and topics and discussions. But until then, until we see you next time, God bless.